As tensions on the Russia-Ukraine border continue to simmer, a united West has threatened to impose never-seen-before sanctions on Moscow if Russia invades Ukraine. Now, amid these threats and Russia's firm deployment along its eastern border, the specifics of these sanctions have the world guessing. In the next few minutes, we look at what punitive measures America and its Western allies can take against Russia and how it will affect Moscow. Now, sanctioning individuals via asset freezes and travel bans is a commonly used tool. And if Russia invades Ukraine, then the West will most likely impose targeted curbs against individuals, including the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this is not us saying it, but US President Joe Biden himself has said that he will be ready to consider personal sanctions against his Russian counterpart in case of an invasion. Recently, a bill was unveiled by US Senate Democrats that foresees sweeping sanctions on top Russian officials, both military and government. Now, Moscow says that any such measures against the Russian president will not harm him personally, but will prove politically destructive for the West.
US President Joe Biden has raised the possibility of imposing personal sanctions upon Vladimir Putin. That would be an extraordinary step. What form could those sanctions take is hard to say. I mean, there's no detail at this stage. It would be very difficult to target Mr. Putin's personal wealth because, as the Kremlin said today, officially speaking, he's not allowed to have any bank accounts or assets overseas. That's a rule in Russia. So the Kremlin says, it would be impossible to hurt Mr. Putin in that way. They have said that any kind of move like this would be politically destructive, but would be painless for Mr. Putin himself.
Another measure being considered would be to exclude Russia from the system known as SWIFT, a global financial messaging service. It is used by many thousands of financial institutions in more than 200 countries. This is not the first time that the possibility of cutting off Russian access to SWIFT is being mulled. Back in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, there were similar whispers, and that prompted Russia to come up with its own financial messaging system, called the SPFS. However, the Russian alternative has failed to establish itself in international transactions. Cutting off Russian access to SWIFT is among the harshest measures that the West can take, and it has the capability to inflict self-harm as well. Experts say that the US and Germany would stand to lose the most from the move, as their banks are the most frequent SWIFT users with Russian banks. This sanction was used against Iran in 2012, and the country lost significant oil revenues and a large chunk of foreign trade. Now, the US could ban Russia from financial transactions involving US dollars. Essentially, any Western firm that allowed a Russian institution to deal in dollars would face penalties. Now, this could have a huge impact on Russia's economy, as most of its oil and gas sales are settled in dollars. Next are the energy and technology restrictions. Now, we just told you that the Russian economy is hugely dependent on selling gas and oil overseas. The sales are a huge source of revenue for the Kremlin. The West could make it illegal for countries and companies to buy oil from the big Russian energy giants such as Gazprom or Rosneft. Now, if such sanctions are imposed, then the Nord Stream 2 pipeline stands to be abandoned. The White House has also told the US chip industry to be ready for new restrictions on export to Russia if Moscow attacks Ukraine. The warning included potentially blocking Russia's access to global electronic supplies. Western powers could take action to further block Russia's access to international debt markets. The ability of Western institutions and banks to buy Russian bonds is already restricted. In April of 2021, Biden barred US investors from buying new Russian ruble bonds over the accusation of election meddling. Now, the move, if taken, will deprive Russia of access to finance that it needs to grow its economy. The country's cost of borrowing might rise and the value of the ruble might fall. Now, leaders of the European Union, along with the US, have been holding talks, mulling possible actions. But the burning question remains, When and under what circumstances will the West sanction Russia?
As far as I remember, the Congress has already discussed a couple of years ago the possible sanctions against Putin. And again, everybody puts a cause. So Russia has to do something terrible on the territory of Ukraine for this sanctions to kick in and to come into force. And again, I doubt that Russia is planning something terrible, and I doubt that the war is actually the military solution is actually on the table.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.